Principles of Microeconomics students. This is the video 2 of 2 for week 3, chapter 5. I am working on updating the syllabus to reflect the new chapters that are due. Again, a reminder that we are not doing the midterm next week, nor are we doing any discussion posts. Actually, the rest of the term, I'm clearing that, and I am opening the discussion post. There will be a discussion for each chapter. I did speak with students this morning in person who suggested that we have open forums, and I agreed each chapter. So I will start with this week, with week 3, and if you want to chime in about any chapters leading up to chapter 5. So chapters 1 through 5, if you have a question, I will have an open forum there. You can post, and other students are welcome to chime in. You will still continue to get the remainder of the points. Please either post or chime in at least once each week so that I can see your name, and you will get percentage points toward your overall grade relative to participation and discussion. I will outline that in the updated syllabus. Now, we left off on slide 29, talking about total revenue, and we are picking back up with total revenue. So when we're talking about price elasticity demand, and we talk about elasticity being greater or less than 1, right? If the demand is elastic, meaning that the price elasticity of demand is greater than 1%, change in quantity is greater than percent change in price, then the fall in revenue from the lower quantity, right, is greater than the increase in revenue from the higher price. So revenue will fall. So there's some very specific things that we have to talk about here. So that meaning that for a little change in price, right, we have a larger change in quantity. So if we raise the price just a little bit, we have a huge amount of quantity demanded that changes, right? We lose a lot of buyers. We lose too many. So raising the price, our overall revenue falls. So when you have an elastic scenario, you don't want to raise price in order to increase revenue. You want to actually do the opposite to increase revenue. And you will see that in the next few slides, that when demand is elastic, a price increase will cause revenue overall to fall. So what do we do in that situation then? When the demand is elastic, we decrease the price just a little bit, and what we will see is a major increase then in the quantity demanded. And so on the flip side, you see a couple here leading up through 31. And 32, we see when the demand is inelastic, we always want to increase the price to increase the revenue, right? Because we increase the price by a little bit or by a lot, we might only lose a few buyers, or the quantity demanded only drops by a little bit. And so there's two key areas when we're thinking about increasing revenue. And a few examples here. And then there's a few examples of how these are used. I'm not as concerned that you know about these examples, policy 1, policy 2, but I'm more concerned that you just see that these things are used actually from a political standpoint and policy-making standpoint. Now, moving on to the next important concept, which is price elasticity of supply. Very similar to the concept of price elasticity of demand. And it just talks about how sellers from the supply side, right, because we know that it slopes in an opposite direction, what happens to these folks? And we know that as the price rises, the quantity produced will rise. So it's different in a sense than the price elasticity of demand, but has the same concept. The slope of the supply curve it relates to then this price elasticity of supply. So the flatter the curve, the bigger the elasticity. Remember, it's still the same. It's still elasticity. And so we have some of the same ideas going on here when we talk about perfectly inelastic at one end versus perfectly elastic on the other end. So a perfectly inelastic supply curve would mean that the price is inelastic, remember, means sensitivity or low sensitivity. So perfectly inelastic would mean there'd be no price sensitivity. So no matter what happens with the price, there is no change in quantity supply. Something inelastic, meaning elasticity is less than 1, means that seller's price sensitivity is low, and we'll see a steep curve, right? Versus a flatter curve where we have something that is considered elastic versus inelastic. Again, unit elastic is where they are equal. Again, still a reference point. Perfectly elastic now is when we have an extreme price sensitivity by sellers. So what we typically will see is this idea of elasticity, which means that when we have a supply curve, it's relatively flat, meaning that a tiny bit change in price will have an extreme effect on the quantity supplied in the marketplace. So very similar to price elasticity demand. So we have a determinant of supply elasticity might be, how readily available something might be versus not being readily available. So there are a few examples here. And it can vary, right? We've learned that slopes can vary depending where they are on the curve. And so if we were actually to quantify using data what suppliers are doing, we would see that at different price point changes, we have different slopes. And so that would initiate maybe elasticity versus inelasticity. Now, there are a couple other elasticities that you won't be tested on, but you should be aware of that relate to responses, right? So elasticity is relating to, it's basically another word for sensitivity, right? So we can look at income elasticity, which measures the quantity demanded per a change in consumer income, right? And then there's also cross price, where the response of a demand for one good changes the price of another good. So we can quantify those sensitivities. And then there's a few examples of cross price elasticity in the news. And that is it for this chapter. But I did want to get on here and talk to you a little bit about the homework. I'm scanning in some fresh homework. There are 7 pages, but there are things crossed out, right? So you have, like other chapters, you have some key terms, you have a few short answers, and one chart to fill out. There are a few on page 3 that go along with the chart. Then I have a few short answers for you. And then I have multiple choice. I have 15 multiple choice. So I'm scanning these in and they will be available, the homework for you. Take your time on the homework. If you have questions, I want to try and get us all back on the same page by the midweek of next week, week 4, to make sure that we are all through chapter 5. And right now we are tabling chapter 6. So by the midpoint of next week, right? Which is what we're using this chapter. By the mid of next week, I'm hoping that we are all at least mostly caught up through chapter 5 in elasticity. If you have questions for me, please reach out. I want to make sure this class is moving fairly quickly. I'm trying to put up extra videos to help. And our next chapter, I think, is probably the trickiest chapter, chapter 7, consumers and producers. And then once we are done with chapter 7 in week 4, the upcoming weeks after that are mostly qualitative. But I will let you know about an updated syllabus. I will be posting the homework for the week, and that will be due by midweek of next week, since it is being posted today, which is a Wednesday. Again, if you have questions, please reach out to me, 814-490-6473. You can shoot me a text or email me at crobertson@ec3pa.org. Have a wonderful afternoon.